Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' base capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good afternoon. It is the 10th of January. Fuck, I'm like a week behind. So we had a riot in the Capitol, or a insurrection, or a coup. I think it all comes down to what level of political science discourse you're really in at. I've read plenty of people complaining it's not a coup, and I'm still not quite sure what to think. I'm quite tickled by images of people scaling walls and demonstrating the ineffectiveness of walls, preventing people from gaining access to facilities. I am extremely amused by, people getting all upset. I mean, what did they expect? I mean, I think getting maced was probably the lightest that some people got. I'm aware that some people lost their lives. I read about black DC police officers, Capitol police officers, who were basically just abandoned and left to defend themselves against mobs of people dropping, spiteful N-bombs. And there's no Back the Blue or Blue Lives Matter when that happened. And then let's see, what else happened that was just...
For the record, did you hear about the man who died in hilarious circumstances?
Oh, the guy who was trying to get the flag and tasered his balls till he had a heart attack?
Tasered his testicles and then had a heart attack.
I mean, that's like the most Darwin Award-winning entry, and it wasn't even a week in. This was the 37th of December, 2020 happening, and a guy tasered his balls till he died.
Yeah, that has to be one of the... And I usually would not laugh at a person dying, but since he's clearly a Nazi, I have no problem laughing at this dude dying in this hilarious way. This is one of the most hilarious deaths of all time.
It's up there, and that's top 5 for the past couple of years. It's got to be.
Definitely Darwin Award level, but also, again, I don't generally like to laugh at misfortune, but when it's a Nazi, I have no problem laughing at that shit.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that he did not see that coming.
Oh, well done, well played.
Yeah, waiting for that one.
Well, and the woman that was shot in the face, I know her name, and I refuse to say it anymore. They immediately pivoted to the, oh my God, she's an Air Force veteran of, I think, 10 to 14 years, totally disregarding that she is completely insane. And
they turned on her. They turned on her.
Yeah. They turned on her in a second.
Yeah, they said that she was an Antifa plant.
I saw some parlor screen grabs of such a thing, and it didn't take long, and I saw this on Twitter at the speed of racism. They pivoted to some really terrible anti-Semitic tropes in her takedown, and I guess their version of a disavowal. Wow.
Well, she failed the mission, so she clearly wasn't a true believer, right?
Yeah.
We're
going back to what Chris said about sort of the hilarity of this. This is so kind of dark that I think we have to process some of this through a humor, or it's going to break some people.
One of the things that happened is the Nazis hijacked the First Amendment. Real quick, the First Amendment was meant to protect journalism and speech that was against the government. That's what the First Amendment was meant to protect. It was not meant to protect Nazis and their hate speech. And it's not meant, there are laws against inciting violence to the point that an organization that has attempted and executed a genocide in the past should not be given protection of the law, period. That's not something Nazis should get. So when we have this notion of free speech, even if it's this Nazi bullshit, that's not what the free speech First Amendment was meant for. And the whole reason we've even come to this framing is because Nazis hijacked the First Amendment. That's what happened. It was never meant to protect Nazis.
Yeah, and you've got those same assholes right now complaining that they're losing followers because either they're bots or the Nazi leaning accounts on Twitter and other social media have been purged. And I'm like, we just went through collectively as a country watching an attempted coup, an insurrection. We have to say those words. And these people are whining about losing Nazi followers. Fucking astonishing.
Well, and we've discussed this weeks ago, in that when we have people trying to commit a coup, but we also have the most overblown and bloated military in the world, obviously a coup's not going to be successful. But what happened is the white supremacist institutions were effectively able to keep our military out of stopping the coup, which obviously, these are not fit human beings. They eat too much McDonald's and don't cook enough of their own food. So this coup was never going to work because they were having heart attacks in the middle of it. They
Yeah.
acknowledged that most of the deaths from this coup were just from overweight, fucking out of shape Nazis not having the proper fitness to be able to have their adrenaline all day long. So then their fucking systems just went into shock and just shut their Nazi bullshit down because their bodies weren't fit enough to go one fucking day. These people are gonna fucking overthrow the government. Anybody, any pundit who ever suggested the fucking Gravy SEALs would ever have a chance overthrowing our military and government should be just never listened to ever again. These people were never going to succeed. Yeah. They couldn't climb a fucking, they got close, but then they fucking wall because they can't keep their heart rate up for more than 10 seconds. They keep their heart rate up for more than fucking heart. When you eat McDonald's 3 times a fucking day.
The crazy, the other layer of that, Chris, as I was filtering through it, and I was talking to my wife about this, it's like these Gravy SEALs, and I love that term, and even some of them are maybe former military, maybe, I don't know, but they are stepping into a world of, we'll use the Secret Service as a sort of the example of where I'm going with this. A lot of Secret Service agents, besides being intentionally trained as Secret Service agents, they come from some pretty hardcore backgrounds. These men and women are so trained and so disciplined. And I remember seeing pretty much the big footage of when they were storming that door, when she who shall not be named was shot. Their tactics on the other side of that barricade were clockwork. Even the way the 2 Metro police moved out of the way, like almost mechanically.
So apparently the DC Capitol Police have a $515 million budget or something dumb, annual budget, and for their 2,000 officers for DC Metro. And they're one of the most highly trained police force units, detachments, whatever they are. They're one of the most highly trained groups in the United States, right behind Los Angeles County SWAT team and there's another like really prestigious law enforcement agency that I'm leaving out there.
Yeah. So, like, we watched, I don't know if you guys got to see that video. As soon as they moved and her face came through that window, and you could see other camera or journalists that had cameras filming how these Secret Service agents were staged and how they were cornered. They popped her, I think, twice, and one of the shots went in her neck, which was the one I think that killed her. And the juxtaposition of they were like in an Orphic, like ecstasy cult blood rage on one side. And when you could see the faces on the other side, they were hard. And I'm like, you guys will lose every time. Like these guys that do this, it's like you're going up against something you don't even understand.
The most physically fit, mentally disciplined, like they don't eat one extra grain of sugar that they haven't accounted for. Serious motherfuckers, like the most sober people on earth, probably.
Yeah, they're not allowed to do drugs and shit. But one of the issues is also coordination in that when you train, you are able to do things with a group that okay, here let's take this back. The whole reason we have sports is to mimic war. And when you have what's called like a play in a game, those things are meant to mimic battlefield deployment movements and in this the more high level strategy ends up being the more chess like uh, uh, interpretations in that especially when you don't have long ranged weapons you have to have more tactical movement of your um, infantry. So it's one of these things where if you look at um, Greek and Roman troop deployment, and even so this is a good point. Even so, in the uh, Independence War, the only reason that the American soldiers, actually the militia, were able to defeat the much larger British army is because of guerrilla warfare. This is one of the things that, you know, the military industrial history version kind of alludes to, but it doesn't really go into detail as to why there are, you know, the same thing with the Boston Tea Party. When you're a much smaller army fighting a bigger army, you have to do things like burn their supplies and cut off their supply chains and trap their armies in climates that they're not used to for long periods of time. There's all these things that you have to do when you're a smaller army to defeat a larger army that we end up now mimicking in the form of sports. That said, when we're talking about people who don't train going up against a highly trained group, this is why when you had thousands of coup people, it only took a couple hundred officers to get control of the situation effectively. So this is kind of where, you know, when we have this romantic interpretation of Spartans, it's for a reason that we romanticize the troop that can take on 10 troops per one, but the art of war discusses that. So this is kind of where it didn't start with Spartans to try to take on if you can have one soldier able to take on 10, when you scale that up, 10 are able to take on 100 and 100 are able to take on 1,000. So this is kind of where that principle is about. The better trained an individual, the more they can, take on 10 untrained individuals. And this is an example of, at the same time, when they turn down National Guard assistance, that's a clear indication of white supremacist influence in the organization, because this same organization brought out National Guard a day before Black Lives Matter protests started. So their reactions are complete opposite when it's a right-wing white supremacist goal. And that's kind of where it's, it's a double-edged sword to have this highly trained institution, then have white supremacist influence sprinkled in that has to be rooted out and exorcised like a demon.
Yeah, it was interesting too when they finally did call the National Guard. I mean, there was all these walls that were put in advance to keep people who were sympathetic to the actual idea of whatever one defines the Constitution as opposed to Trumpism. That I think there were Trump loyalists slowly moving things to kind of stall out the National Guard, and it was really interesting to me that they said it was Pence that ended up authorizing the use of the National Guard, which is supposedly something I think only the president can do in D.C.
They don't have like isn't there not a governor in D.C. or a mayor who has like the authority to? I mean, I know that they're not a state.
I think the thing in D.C. is that since they are not a state, that it's in this nebulous constitutional formula where it's basically a federal state, if that makes any sense. It does not have a governor. Basically, the president would sort of step into the de facto role. And people who are much more knowledgeable about this should comment about. But as far as my understanding, because the National Guard for Washington, D.C. is actually the Army. It is not a National Guard unit in the same structure as, say, the state of Indiana's or the state of Ohio.
Governor of Maryland was trying to activate the National Guard, and the general wasn't getting authorization until they received the higher level authorization 5 hours later. So there was definitely some sort of tacit obstruction that was occurring, because it was the governor of Maryland who was trying to send the National Guard into D.C.
I mean, what were they playing Monopoly to try to figure out who made the call?
Most likely, sadly, yeah.
So then here comes the snowstorms, because it looks like it's about to start snowing in Texas. So it's things, there's not going to be a civil war when it's snowing in Texas. Those people are going to be...
They're going to lose their damn minds. I've seen Southerners in the snow. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
I remember a few years ago when there was freezing rain and snow in Georgia, and there was just videos of cars sliding all over the place because they don't have tires for that. They don't have budgets for salt and sand.
Exactly. They're not prepared for that.
They don't even have the trucks.
Salt trucks just sit around.
Well, and I think here's the interesting part of where we're at now is that there's already, and it took me all of 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes to sort of on the surface, and I'm not an aggregate, so I'm not a professional at it, but there's already and people are doing screen grabs and captures off of Parler. They're already planning something for the inauguration.
Oh, of course.
And it's gonna be so infuriating when some in the media and a lot in the GOP are going to be like, well, how did we get here? We don't know who these people are. And I'm like, I'm just a dude in Indiana on a smartphone, aggregating stuff, and I can see it in 10 minutes. And I'm not the only one that can. But apparently, law enforcement cannot.
Not that they cannot. It's that there is a tacit refusal to act.
Yeah.
It's that the cultural perception within the broader law enforcement community precludes an equitable approach to the distribution of justice and to essentially the prevention or the preventative actions that need to be taken in order to safeguard systems and actors who are trying to influence existing systems for the broader equitable approach. And that's what's the most infuriating part is, or one of the most infuriating parts.
It looks
Because
like
if they really wanted to do something, they'd do something. If they really wanted to do something, they'd do something. It's not, I mean, look at how easy it was for other demonstrations to get squashed, for people to get kettled, maced, beaten in the streets. And then we have something like this happen. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Oh, they just
bias.
the footage of the cops opening the gates. It's just like, have at it.
Right. So that means that, again, at all levels within that institution, there are what I think are weaknesses. It's weakness. And it's an erosion of structure. It's basically a substitution of white supremacist ideology for what the slogans that govern the broader cultural perceptions that have grown with this country try to convince people of.
Yeah, I think Chris and I, a while back, I had talked about the Proud Boys basically being Ernst Röhm's brown shirts, right? And I had often joked on Facebook, but was also serious. When was the Night of the Long Knives going to happen to the Proud Boys? And I'm wondering if we're going to see an equivalent here, and not because of any sense of justice, but the brown shirts will have to be swept away for something more insidious, right? The idea that everything from the man bear pig guy to the podium guy, everybody that broke through it's got arrested.
The guy that took the stand, he got arrested. He had to turn himself in.
They're obviously not going to be all assassinated in one night because, most metaphors aren't entirely perfect. But this is, I think, the sort of equivalent we're seeing of the Night of the Long Knives. And scary times, man. It's just like, okay, what happens when a competent, and even going farther back, me and Chris talked about Operation Paperclip.
There's not a competent right winger.
Yeah, that's true. Fair point.
Let's squash that. Remember the bell curve, how it's like 50% of people are basically just functional automatons that can't actually pass a test? That's basically the entire right wing. There's not a competent person among them. So that notion that, we have to worry about a competent group of people overthrowing the cap. No, the fuck we don't.
I'm not talking about a direct overthrow. I'm talking about the slick operator that sort of hides from the inside.
That person doesn't exist either. The closest thing they have is a fucking reality television horrible business person that was able to hide his poor finances for fucking decades because he's white. That's it. That's the closest.
That's true.
Guess what?
Yeah.
Elon Musk, he's a fucking entire lie. He's everybody thinks Elon Musk is Tony Stark. He's Mysterio. Mysterio is a fucking
great analogy. Yeah.
He's been Mysterio this entire time. Everybody thought he was fucking Tony Stark. How the fuck do you double your fortune as from going to 100 billion to nearly 200 billion without doubling your car production? It's all a fucking lie. That whole thing is just, it's like it's an illusion that people are not good enough at math to call bullshit on. You cannot double the value of your company without doubling the production, without it being just purely speculative bubble. It's like nobody's calling Tesla a bubble because Elon Musk is the fucking romantic love interest of the media, in that they will not call him on his bullshit. This dude is such a charlatan. I am so sick of people romanticizing Elon Musk as if he's not really just. He didn't even start Tesla. He didn't even fucking start Tesla.
He bought Tesla from a South African roadster company.
He didn't even.
And you just get so infuriated. Like, the other infuriating part about him on his symbolism, he calls the car a Tesla. And I'm like, dude, you're the Edison to Tesla, man. Like, you steal shit from other people, Elon. Like, it's like, stop.
You
And
know,
the idea of SpaceX subverting NASA and getting effectively more funding because the government is giving them contracts, it's fucking ridiculous. This is people who support an apartheid baby who got his fucking fortune from his parents owning a diamond mine during apartheid times, coming over to our country and taking government subsidies to build his fucking dream. And basically, even though NASA is a Nazi organization at the core, it's still better than having a private organization control our space program. That is fucked up. And the fact that we've gotten here is because the media has had a love fest with this dude and turned him into America's poster boy for the American. It's really fucked up. It's
Chris, wow, you just got back to where my brain was going with when we were talking about Operation Paperclip. And NASA had Werner von Braun. I forgot. There was a Nazi officer that became basically the head of what would become the CIA. So we had all these Nazis put in offices that they should have been nowhere near. And we wonder, where does this stuff come from? And then you just want to wave that paperclip. And if you wanted to be an ass to these people, which I think we should, to give an aneurysm, hey, where did Hitler get his ideas for his insane racial purity laws? Was America. All of them from the South and some from the North. Well, actually, I say a lot from the North too, but in a weird sort of convoluted, wrong, circuitous, not so circuitous route, America gave Hitler the blueprint.
Well, I recently reread Stephen Pressfield's the War of Art, to flip the art of war on its head. And one of the things he discusses in that book is how it was easier for Hitler to start a genocidal war than to become an artist, because a lot of people have heard about Hitler's attempt to become a painter, but nobody's ever seen a fucking Hitler painting. And then he frames it in that when you are trying to do something, it's always easier to take the route that is given, that's the easy one. And this is where the fucking CIA and Time magazine was coming in, calling this dude the person of the year after he wrote Mein Kampf and shit, and where, it was easier for him to be what the left, the Western media made him out to be, than to actually do what he wanted to do before he became a genocidal maniac. Because again, that's where this whole framing of it's there is an alternate universe where Hitler never became a genocidal maniac and succeeded in his art career. And that's one of those things where maybe somebody else became that person, maybe nobody became that person. And it's hard to explore those hypothetical realities because we are in what seems to be the worst timeline, but it could have gotten a whole lot worse. He could have won that war. So there's all these variations.
We're in a timeline that still exists.
Right, exactly.
Somewhere there's an alternate timeline, sadly, that he invaded, he got into the United Kingdom and then leapfrogged to the United States.
Exactly. That's we were so close to that one that it's damn near impossible that timeline doesn't exist. And this is kind of where, now that we are better able to comprehend how the universe works, it's not that there's an infinite number of possibilities, but it's likely that there are parallel universes where there are subtle changes. There's just not enough energies to sustain an infinite number of parallel universes. This is where, as physics advances its understanding, it's like we're getting. This is also one of the reasons that simulation theory doesn't necessarily hold up under scrutiny, in that every point would need 3 points of articulation to simulate it. So a computer that is simulating our entire universe has to have 3 times the processing power of sustaining this. It's like a logarithmic increase in necessity for power usage to sustain it, something of this scale. So this is kind of where the things that we used to think about how the universe worked, simulation theory wasn't always possible, but it's one of the least likely possibilities now, in that there's a limited multiverse in a membrane. Because then it went from string theory to M theory.
Are we on foam theory now?
Yeah, exactly. And that exactly. So this is kind of where foam theory gets closer to a point where it would explain why there's kind of a universal buoyancy and everything seems to go to a layer in the universe if you look at it at from a certain perspective. But again, there's all these things about how our understanding, because then we're still looking at the matter that we can see, which is only technically like 4% of what's out there. So there's a lot of things about our capacity to test this universe. And
well, you just made me think about the smallest things. A sandwich and the Archduke Ferdinand. The assassin went back for a sandwich and had a second attempt to assassinate, right? A sandwich. The sandwich changed the course of right then, because obviously, as we all know, like World War I directly bleeds in to the cause of World War II. Like, at what point, how did that timeline exist when well, he wasn't hungry that day, so he didn't go get the sandwich. You know, it's like, it's mind-blowing to me.
Somebody was hungry earlier and already ate the sandwich.
I think of the variability and the progressive generation of events that humans are involved in based off of human imagination, and the capacity to influence decisions based off of, if there's a simulation. So we talked about how correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but based off of what you said, it's not highly likely, based on some theories, that the simulation theory holds up, because you require 3 points of articulation and there isn't enough processing power in order for that to sustain itself. So then I'm thinking, how many points of articulation for somebody imagining things for their entire life would there, need to be? Because that's a tremendous amount of information, even if people aren't very imaginative, or if they have different levels of understanding or different levels of mental capacity and intelligence. And imagination is a very vast, highly individually variable, conceptualized thing. And that's just a tremendous amount of information to try and simulate across, billions of people who are almost unanimously perceiving an environment that they're sharing.
I think that's why there's this predisposition to only, when you actually think about how many people are processing information simultaneously, it overloads your brain because our brain isn't able to comprehend it. So it becomes this attempt to understand what's actually happening, but never actually being able to, because it would technically overload anybody's brain if they understood how many people were processing information at any given moment. So then it becomes this circular logic of not being able to grasp that the universe does not revolve around that person's processing. And in fact, everybody's processing things, which is where you get people thinking, oh, the earth is the center of the universe because I'm actually the center of the universe, because the universe needs all this processing power from my brain because my brain is the most important. But there's this like fractal, there's a fractal
So
on the,
I've got two things about this. I am the center of the universe because let's just assume that I can have the most powerful telescope. No matter where I search and measure, I can only measure as far as the speed of light allows me to, and so there is a physical limit to where I can measure. And I'm being totally facetious, by the way. I realize that I'm not the center of the universe, but for the sake of what I can measure, I am absolutely the center of the universe. And then you reminded me of something. Now I can't even remember what I was thinking about.
well, but that goes into it, in that the inability to recognize that your singular perspective is not the only perspective, and that all perspectives are simultaneously valid in tandem with the perspective not even being necessary. There becomes this fractal capacity to imagine scenarios that then would also, this is why the logarithmic processing of the simulation is unlikely, because for every individual, the processing on their inside becomes a fractal possibility, a fractal set of possibilities that could inevitably go on infinitely. So that processing is even higher than processing their actions. And this is those types of things. When you understand how computers work at the large scale, simulation theory doesn't scale to actually work for many reasons. But this is also why it's also hard for people to not get out of their ego, because it takes a lot of mental processing power. If you actually are able to think about even 300 people, what those people are all thinking at any given moment, and actually go into detail, because then you'd have to understand where that person has been their entire life to know what they would be thinking in that moment. And that's a whole lot of information, down to
Dunbar's number is really like 100 to 150 people. So
yeah,
300 be like a super intellect.
Oh yeah,
I mean like beyond super intellect.
You'd have to know their capacity for language. So if one person knows two languages right there, you'd have to be able to understand, oh, if this person's thinking in this different language, to understand it, that's a whole different library of sounds that I need to know in order to understand that. So that's where the processing that it would take to actually run a simulation of this is just unreasonable. It's not logical. Like the notion of that was put forth by people who are smart in one area but not smart enough in another. Somebody may be good at physics, but they've never actually coded a computer. So they don't know how threads work and all these other things. Or even it would be more like object-oriented coding, where you have semi-autonomous and autonomous objects that are able to rewrite their own code. But still, that would take such a high level of processing power that it's just not really likely, is what it comes down to.
You just made me remember a Zen concept of, and you didn't remind me. Let me be more powerful in the language. You reinforced the Zen concept. Every human is their own world, right? And we are these worlds all by ourselves, but we have to interact with other worlds, right? The idea that the metaphor is solid, and you just talking about that as far from like your experience of like a data level and like processing level, it just hit me like, wow, like it really just reinforced that idea.
I think that idea works out if you're like trying to achieve some kind of solitary meditative state out in the beautiful wilderness, and there's some kind of fog rolling in over the hills, and you hear some bird chirping and the bamboos rustling in the wind. But once you go to a city with like, you know 10, 20, 30 million people in it, that that just breaks down. The simulation becomes so, I mean, unbelievably vastly complex at that point. There's just we're not sitting in a fucking GTA.
Exactly.
If this
Not
isn't
to mention
GTA.
all the individual biological processes that are occurring
Oh
all
yeah.
simultaneously on their own rhythms
Imagine
based off of diet.
imagine the metropolitan algorithm for how to randomize a citizen releasing flatulence for GTA.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, like at one point somebody had to code that so that every 13th of a second someone within a certain radius would rip one. Like seriously.
Right. This is where object-oriented coding makes things like that easier. In that, in a lot of these games, you'll have NPCs that have their own code that can interact with other people or other NPC code and get modified on the back end so that it's happening while you're doing other things. So this is where you'll go around the city in GTA and things have been happening while you're not there because they're taking processing power and putting it towards giving these individual objects their own functionality to then interact with other objects to make the world more real. And this is where you'll run into people that if you just walk around in a city in GTA, things are always happening because that's how they coded it, but it also takes a shitload of processing power, which is also then why it takes 7 to 10 years to make one of those games and they don't rush them. I think it takes about 7 years at the least to make one of those GTA level games. I think it took, what was it, 12 or not 12? I think it was 8 for Cyberpunk.
And well, we all see how that turned out.
Right, and they rushed that.
Yeah.
It probably should have taken more like 12.
How long did
Even Red Dead Online has problems. Like
Yeah.
even and Red Dead is like GTA Wild West, and it still has some issues because it's a work in progress.
how long did
I've been
it's-
playing a lot of Star Trek Online, and it's a mature game. It's been around for a decade, and there are things about it that make me wonder. It's like I wonder, like, is this actually a bug, or is this just like something that they decided no one's complaining enough about it for this to be an issue, and it doesn't actually affect gameplay?
yeah, how long did do any of you know how long Skyrim took? Because that's a very immersive world where, like Chris had said, there's things that happen in the background before you even get there.
Yeah.
I want to say that one was developed to the point it is over 14 years. It was released, I think, after 5 or 6 developing it because it was nowhere near where it's at now when they first released it. So I think I mean, they keep updating it. But I think, yeah, it was 3 years originally. Released in 2011, and then, but yeah, they've been, so it's done about 12 years of development to get where it is today, because they've been constantly updating it.
Skyrim was such a fun game when it first came out. Still is fun. I actually must have spent a lot of time playing that game. And I played it on the Xbox 360. I don't have an up-to-date console or PC of any kind, but it's still an entertaining game if I ever go back to it. It's limited, of course, at this point, and it has a couple of bugs, but it's a lot of fun. The graphics aren't insanely phenomenal by today's standards, but still the story is enjoyable and the broad range of storytelling within it.
I'm glad that you mentioned today's standards. I think that, Chris was talking about how much power it would require to generate a believable world. And, Flight Simulator 2020 generates this incredibly immersive world where you can see other people flying, and they will even integrate real-time weather and traffic information. And I mean, it's not, once you get down to the ground, it's not like super detailed, but from the air, it looks pretty believable from the air. And they process the horizon out to a certain point where the horizon should be. And on the most powerful gaming systems that I've seen video footage from, it looks spectacular. I believe Chris has referred to this as crossing into the uncanny valley. And,
I love that expression. Yeah.
Where it starts to look pretty fucking real. Like, holy shit, this is a video game? And it takes a absolute top-of-the-line, top-shelf component-loaded machine with an unobtainable video card now to get that kind of performance for one user. And we're talking like a 12 to 1600 watt power supply. We're not cheaping out on the power at this point. So
it's a 20 gig. Because they've done it, they estimate now that it takes about 24 gigs to process all of the data to represent from 40,000 feet on the horizon.
Yeah.
Or what I forget what level it was, but that was the metric they used to say to be able to visually process everything. It takes about 24 gig, a 24 gig GPU. But it's taking up like 24 gigs of data per second to represent it.
Yeah. Eat that, gamers. And they're probably not even pushing more than 60 hertz, like 60 frames per second. They probably don't need to, because there's so much information being processed that 120 is unobtainable. 144 is like, ha. No, I'm serious. And it's like, this is at like 4K resolution. Some people are pushing 8K resolutions with this stuff, and it looks fantastic. But this is completely unobtainable. And this is like this is a simulator, it's a flight simulator. And with the most powerful systems that are obtainable by normal people, one person, very limited interaction with other players. God, if that's all we're given here, and there's a simulator, a computer system running everything that we know as reality as in the form of a simulation, I want to see what that thing can do with Flight Simulator.
Yeah, right. What can you do in an immersive video game world with that sort of
if that's real
sort of power?
If that's real, why can we have like an option, like one day a year, to turn off the safety or turn off the reality mode and just have like, jump off of a building and bounce on the concrete day? Or
yeah, that would be awesome.
I'd like to jump out of a plane and bounce off of the concrete. That'd be cool.
You just made me think of like, it's not obviously on the side of processing power, but I guess
call it no collateral damage day or something like that. Cars could hit each other and they would just bounce. It'd be like everything was made out of rubber and marshmallows.
The innovations that they make in coding and computing. I'm a big Mass Effect junkie in Dragon Age. And, I remember being a kid in the 70s, going back to like Pong, right? Like, and then, flash forward years later, the idea that you could take a game, completely play through a relatively immersive world. And I believe that Mass Effect was that in Dragon Age that did this at the same time. What you did in the first game could be coded to a game to play your decisions and how you shape the world and carry that through multiple.
Fable? No, Fable only had one.
Fable. I thought it was Mass Effect. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought it was Mass Effect was actually the first to do something like that.
Well, I think Fable actually might have tried, but they didn't execute it. Then the same thing happened with Mass Effect. So they'll say they do one thing, and then it doesn't actually deploy the way originally claimed before it got released. Because I think Fable to Fable, it was either Fable 2 to Fable 3 or Fable 1 to Fable 2. They were trying to say that your actions influenced it, but then they weren't able to actually deploy
It
it
was
because it
Fable
takes
1
a
to
lot
2.
of writing. What people didn't realize at the time, namely the executives, was that if you want to do those types of games, then you have to write and produce so much more information than just a linear on the rails game, and they just didn't understand. So they were trying to underfund it, but push it at the same time. So, yeah, Mass Effect, between Mass Effect 1 and 2, there was a okay amount of pullover of the content, but between 2 and 3, they did a really good job about it. But then they promised that there was going to be 3 different endings, and they just did not deliver on that. And it was basically the same ending with different colors.
Deus Ex
Yeah,
is
then
one of
they
those
then they had they
multi-ending
released
games.
what they called the director's or extended cut ending, which they made it tolerable, at best. And they did the same thing with Dragon Age because it's BioWare. They did the same thing with but the way that you don't obviously play the same character from Dragon Age Origins and then into Inquisition's Ladder. It's just Dragon Age 2, and then it jumps into Inquisition. And it's probably an easier mechanism to write if you're not playing the same hero, you're not playing the same character.
I think Fable may have been the first to introduce the mechanism that the world reacted to your actions. So if you committed a murder in one city, they'd hear about it in another city. And it wasn't just isolated to the locale, like geography. I think that's what Fable really invented in their engine that was novel at the time, if memory serves.
Yeah, in Skyrim, if you steal from a place, even if it's like halfway across the map, you can get accosted by hired assassins who are trying to seek retribution for your theft.
Yeah, I know that they have bounties too in Skyrim, right? Like if you roll into a town where you've committed murder, there's mechanisms for you to be arrested.
You'll be arrested, and all stolen goods that you have in your person will be confiscated.
Yeah, and then they put you in jail and everything, right?
You have to pay your way out.
Or I think you can fight, or you can.
Yeah, I think it says this. I never played a character that was a thief, so I can't say I'm totally familiar with the mechanic. But yeah, basically you can either fight or buy your way out. Pick one.
Well, if you're a part of the Thieves Guild, then after a certain point of getting experience within the Thieves Guild, then you can bribe the guard and get your way out. And then if you're a Thane of the town in which you commit a crime, then you can get let go.
So it's all about who you know.
It's all about who you know.
Yeah. How much nobility titles you have.
The one Skyrim thing that I'm aware of is the whole like taking an arrow to the knee that became a meme for a while. I used to do that till I took an arrow to the knee. If memory serves, it's like a euphemism for getting married.
Yeah, I only learned that relatively recently.
It's a whole running gag in the Skyrim game.
Yeah.
And in the Skyrim subculture of memes, there's always something like that floating around.
I don't know if any of you had gotten around. There was a DLC for Mass Effect 3 where your shepherd is cloned, and there's this whole hilariously written bit of dialogue about when you go back to 1 and 2, where you as the shepherd hears your clone speak, and you're like, do I sound like that? Tell me I don't talk like that. And then your whole party is like basically, it's just like, this is very clever. It's like, do I really sound like this? Tell me I don't talk that way.
Man, that's like the way everyone talks. Everyone uses words, the like and but and these words get used all the time. I think at one point there may have been a concerted effort within our education system to teach people how to speak, but I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. I know that public speaking is a requirement in college,
Huh.
but I don't think that. I think speech class is not a thing anymore, and so we have people who learn to talk by watching television or by watching movies or listening to music. It's tough because so much of our language is adapting in real time, and it's hard to keep up sometimes. And then next thing you know, there's a word out there that's just one of those. How the hell did this happen? Me being me, I'll try and look it up, but sometimes language is just one of those dynamic things that it's challenging and exciting and fun and
Yeah,
sometimes fucking terrifying.
yeah, language and dialect definitely have to change. They mutate. You can't stop that.
Yeah, words are added every year. Neologisms, maybe that's how you say it. Uh, that's like when new words emerge.
Or and that and idioms.
Idioms
What
emerge
was
too.
one? Oh, I remember now. Lee asked me. She's like, "What does the expression 'cut of your jib' mean?" Like when you say, I don't like the cut of their jib, and I was like, "It's a sail. It's a nautical term." Like, and I thought about it for a minute. I was like, "Well, why wouldn't somebody like the cut of the jib?" And back in the days of identifying ships at a distance that would not necessarily fly their flags, you would know, oh, that's a Spanish ship, that's a Portuguese ship by the way they manufactured and cut their sails. Where all these weird, like how these expressions, and there's, of course, whole dictionaries of just idioms and where they come from.
I
I
can
need to
see it
like find
now.
one.
I don't like the cut of your jib, sir.
I don't like the cut of your jib. But these things stick in dialect, man. It's just so funny.
Then you see a
stays and
pirate
what doesn't.
ship, and it's got like a combination of French and Spanish sails and an Italian mast, and then the lady on the front. There's like two of them on the front, and one of them is Portuguese, and the other is English, and
Yeah.
it's just like the junk. It's not a junk ship though. It's like the hodgepodge trophy ship. Man, I wish I could see it like a legit pirate ship without actually having to be around legit pirates, because I'm pretty sure they would just kill me for being like a modern person. It'd be terrifying, actually. Or they might be really fucking cool. Man, that's such a tough.
Now you're gonna have me photoshopping pictures of ships.
It's such a tough mythology. Like, part of me wants to be like, yeah, pirates are awesome, but I'm pretty sure that piracy was just a cutthroat industry.
No modern medicine either.
Oh man, imagine how bad a pirate ship would smell. A bunch of dudes that don't really bathe. Like the closest they get to bathing is jumping in the ocean, which itself is a pretty nasty, swarthy mess of fluids and animal
Well,
shit.
I guess you could choose if you want to be what was considered a privateer versus just a pirate, and you got to if you're a privateer, you had a letter of marque from
Oh sure.
some European monarchy to
Yeah, you
fuck
could
with
be a
whoever you
corsair
wanted.
and hunt pirates and still be a pirate, but something tells me that those guys didn't bathe much either. I think that's why they had to. I think that's why rum was so popular, and gotta nullify that sense of smell and taste, so that gruel that's being served isn't killing you. I can't imagine a pirate's life being that interesting either. Because how many pirates actually get to be the badass? It's like the there's only one badass drug dealer in the gang movie. It's like the number one dude, and everyone else wants to be that person, but they don't get to be that person because there's only one guy or woman that gets to have that role. I think on a pirate ship, there's really only one, like, captain of the ship, so everyone else is a peon.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that's actually how it works, because it seems to be it's either going to be that or a team of people who are equally as badass that have to deal with each other because of circumstances. It's kind of either
So
or.
it's like that's like a pirate supergroup.
Right. And that's why
Well,
I wonder.
We're the Pirate Avengers. Yar.
I feel like the super group would be more successful than
Oh,
the
yeah.
individual.
That'd be like a
Um,
pirate fleet then.
Right.
yeah, not an area that I got into a lot. I scratched the surface of in college was the era of piracy. Some crews were pretty egalitarian and were kind of democratic, and others were sort of like, the tyrant at the helm sort of idea of a ship. And you move into characters like Anne Bonny and I think her name was Mary Read, and they were actually captains. And they didn't impersonate men. There's sort of this. Some people have the myth from the outside of it that they must have been like hiding as men. No, they who they were is, as a matter of fact, I think it was Anne Bonny was with Calico Jack Rackham, and I think ended up getting pregnant by Calico Jack Rackham at one point.
Man, what a
So
name.
what's that?
What a great name. That sounds like a traveling entertainer.
Calico Jack?
Yeah, Calico Jack. He plays one mean fiddle.
Well, I think that's the other thing about pirates too. They were these badass men and women, and some of the men that were badasses were also dandies at the same time. And everybody applies this weird filter of like, this heterotoxic idea. Oh, they're effeminate, they're sissies, and I'm like, okay, good luck with that.
Yeah, sissies that can run you through with their saber, like.
And look good while doing it,
Yeah.
right? Like,
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
I mean, and they, of course, their whole thing about their flags were highly, like Edward Teach was Blackbeard, for example. They were often either given names or just sort of they had these fanciful names that they came up with to sort of, create a legend.
Yeah.
And then it was co-opted by mass media, multimedia, turned into a series of commercially successful legends for children to emulate and imagine. But I feel like the imaginations.
I think
of the
Disney had to
younger
change the
people.
Pirate of the Caribbean ride because it had some like really extra racist shit going on. Like they had black slaves in chains on the ride, like up until maybe 5-10 years ago or something fucked up.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, let's not give Disney a pat on the back. Like a lot of the media that they haven't just completely vaulted is pretty fucked up shit. You can still go get a
Yeah.
copy of fucking Brer Rabbit or whatever. Brer Rabbit?
This gets back to the xenophobic representations. Like, let's not forget, last week the media was trying to tell us that Jack Ma got disappeared by the
Oh yeah.
Oh,
government, and then next day had to come out and be like, yeah, he's just laying low. Let's forget that ever happened. And then everybody forgot it ever happened. Pepperidge Farm remembers, because
yeah, dude. Pepperidge Farm remembers
Does remember.
everything.
that this dude got disappeared because he wasn't on Twitter for a couple. The oh my god, the insane logic that is applied to establish these headlines that are run just to get clickbait. In that they'll say, "Oh, Jack Ma hasn't been on Twitter for 2 months." The Chinese government may have disappeared him. That line of logic is so irrational that the news organizations that ran it are able to continue operating is borderline criminal, if not full on criminal, because that's some xenophobic shit that
Well,
enabled Disney to do that
they're
xenophobic shit
fucking
for so
tabloids.
long.
They're stepping into tabloid territory. They're just speculating. They're saying some shit because they have nothing else going on. It's just pathetic. You're right. They shouldn't be allowed to keep operating. There should be some kind of like gold standard for an agency that wants to report news. Otherwise, they should just come out and be like Fox News and say, "Oh, we're an entertainment show. We're not actually to be taken seriously."
We're not obligated to actually be truthful.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an editorial show, fine, say whatever the fuck they want, but it's got to be obvious.
Well, and it kind of goes back to what Daniel was talking about, how it's like the reverse of romanticism, that that we're saturated in media with different incredibly horrible tropes. Like being a kid growing up in the 80s, it was like some bad forces in Hollywood got a hold of, oh my God, this new word yakuza, this other new word triad, and man, I can't even go back in good conscience and watch some of the films that I was into, as a kid, because you're just like, the stereotypes are so awful. And then, like years later, they do this stuff, it creeps into people's, it sort of forms their reality of what they think Asian, or in specific cases, what the Chinese had done. Oh, they disappeared him. And it's like you just look at these people, because like, sadly, of course you think this way. You've been shoveled this shit for, 2 generations or 3 generations. And it's like, you got to break the chain somewhere.
Yeah, seriously, why would the Chinese want to disappear Jack Ma? He makes them so much fucking money. Like, Ant Group is being nationalized. He makes them so much fucking money. Like, so much money. And I don't even think I can emphasize how much money so much money is, but it's more than people realize. More than people will ever be able to actually count. He makes them that much money. Like, all the fucking time. Like, Amazon, Bezos, Jack Ma, like, moves shit in ways that, and of course it's not apples to apples, because, we're in a capitalist society where the wealth is concentrated, and China is more, we're taking our chunk for all of our programs. Yeah. Because they're actually a people's government on some weird level, that in a way that we've only, talked about not being possible. That doesn't make any sense. But somehow they figured it out. I mean, it makes sense if we've been lied to this whole time.
Those lies are perpetual and so constant that it's hard to know what's real. I think that's ultimately the root of that QAnon conspiracy theorist person, in that our government lies constantly, our media lies constantly. Those things are in fact true. But jumping to the most insane and outrageous conclusion it's not in line with Occam's razor. That's where people, again, this gets back to that bell curve. All the people on the right wing do not know what Occam's razor is. They won't understand Occam's razor even if you put the Wikipedia article in front of them. It's not something that simply telling them about Occam's razor and showing them Occam's razor, they'll never be able to comprehend it, which is why they end up jumping to these ridiculous conclusions.
I like to think of that as Hakeem's scimitar.
It might as well be to them, right? It's like, Here, crack open. Like, Chris, you can't even get him to a Wikipedia. God forbid you got to get him to crack open a philosophy text. Just forget it. It's out of the question.
Yeah, there's no fucking way. And this is kind of where, again, that's what I mean. Well, I guess I am just respecting them, but I'm just describing the actual situation. There are no people on the right wing who are in the top 50% of intelligence. That's just not how it goes.
Well, I had talked with people about this phenomenon too. It's like a deficit in creative intelligence as well, not just process. I mean, if you really think about it, what insanely talented and gifted right-wing musicians exist?
No
You know,
right-wing comedians, no right-wing, well, there are no talented right-wing comedians, because then the ones you make the good jokes are actually pretending. Then there's no right-wing visual artists, no right-wing video game makers, no right-wing fucking television. In that, this is why they always complain about left-wing Hollywood. They just don't have anybody that's good enough to make TV shows on the right wing that anybody would actually watch. I mean,
Hallmark and Lifetime.
Before were, I think, pretty left-wing people.
well, and their lack of creativity. Like me and Tien a while back talked about, and I'm going to use the example of Frank Herbert and Dune. You know, like a right winger. God, who was it recently? Read Dune, and he apparently idolized Dune, and I'm like, it. You really just latched on to what you perceive as the white savior message, and you never made it to the second book because Herbert smashes that shit with a hammer. And it's like you said, Chris, it's this lack of creativity. It's like, I'm not going to read the second book. It's a combination of just lack of intelligence and creativity coupled with just a willful ignorance.
Yeah, but at some point, like, I don't need to read fucking 10 books about Dune. Arrakis isn't that interesting. It's a desert world. I'll save everyone a bunch of time. He makes it rain at the end.
There you go.
And I'm not talking about the Lynch movie. I'm talking about the actual book. Like, I think it's like 6 or 7 volumes after Dune. He makes it rain, and then the worms all die, and there's no more spice production, and that's it. The end. You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, the first 3 are fantastic.
No, the first three books really are a fantastic galactic space opera. Like, truly some of the best space opera that there is, because it does everything. It's right up there with Foundation.
Yeah, and it's like there's no way a right winger could have ever written such a thing on a few different levels.
I mean, Herbert might have been a little nutty, but I don't. He was definitely writing a story where the protagonists were the rebellion and the people standing up against a galactic empire.
Well, then you find out right wingers start to identify with characters written by Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, for them to only find out that those people are about as far left as one could possibly get.
I know, those are some beautifully subversive writers, right? Like, you guys just missed the mark on this, right wingers.
Yeah, for sure. Because then you read Grant Morrison's stuff. Man, Invisibles is not for everybody. There's a lot. Grant Morrison he writes some fucked up shit, but then you realize, oh, this non-binary person was forced to live in a very homophobic environment. So yeah, of course they're gonna write this stuff. I mean, gender queer phobic environment. I don't know what the right term for somebody who's afraid of non-binary people is, because those people are weird. But
yeah, well,
whatever that person is what drove Grant Morrison to write that crazy shit, and you see it now.
Yeah, Gibson is sort of considered the godfather of cyberpunk, but there were some other great authors. And a guy named Effinger wrote, I think, 3 books. And the first one was called When Gravity Fails. And in a weird way, it's like Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side, written as cyberpunk. One of the sort of linchpins of the cyberpunk world that he creates is that there's all sorts of like gender fluid people all over the place. And the technology for gender reassignment is much more available, thorough, and safe. And entire subcultures sort of revolve around people. And people in the books can go get the surgeries back and forth. They can do this safely. And it hit more power to me for the book, or it was a more powerful hit for me for the novels, because they were just so fascinating when you find out that Effinger wrote these novels based on a lot of the characters that he knew were trans or gay, or they were drag, right? They were his friends. Which hence I made the comparison to Lou Reed. Obviously, that narrative of Walk on the Wild Side are his people, right? And I'm like, and this was back in the late 80s that these books were written. And it's like, it's cool that stuff was starting to just gain traction.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people, obviously, especially that lower 50%, are not aware of how literature is used to subvert a populace that has suffered groupthink and has used groupthink towards oppressive ends. So they don't know about the McCarthyism and how writing was used to get around McCarthyism and all that. So it's going to go beyond them to look towards comic books, especially to understand where LGBTQ people have had to hide their pain and personal expression for decades because they couldn't come out in public without fear of being attacked and possibly killed just for existing. That's how those comic books have also been able to exist, because those lower 50% intelligence people aren't bothering to consume literature in their free time. So that stuff is 100% protected from people who don't spend their free time reading or looking at art.
God, what a boring existence.
What's that?
What a boring
they don't
existence.
appreciate art. Like we're in an era that, and two, the criticism and subversive things also in music, like how music communicates oppression. Right-wing people can never even write that music, let alone appreciate it. It's just like they'll get it. They think they even get it on the surface, and I was like, you're just aping it, and it's terrible.
Yeah, I definitely, it's funny because then you find out the people who were kind of hit and miss, then you find out a lot of them have right-wing views, and it's like, oh, that's why this person was kind of funny, but it's almost just that they had some funny by proxy or some charisma by proxy of hanging around left-wing people, because it's a pretty stark difference in that I think if someone is on the left, as what we understand it, they're generally more concerned with not having people feel bad, period. That's like the easiest way to say it. Left-wing people are generally concerned with having people not feel bad in any capacity. And the right-wing people generally don't care how other people feel, and they're only concerned with themselves. And at the core, that's what separates the left and the right in this country. And it's a really simple classification of the two sides, and I think that's where it's really easy to break them down because they're so extremist about it. In that, the most militant left wing people are militant to protect oppressed peoples, whereas the most militant people on the right are trying to use laws to oppress people, and they are exact opposites, diametrically opposed to each other, and there is no, you can get off of that, but then it becomes a problem when there are oppressed peoples, because not not participating always ends up helping the oppressor, and that's one of the problems with choosing not to participate in the deconstruction of the oppressive system.
Yeah. Lately, a while back, I forgot where I read it, but the expression "the cruelty is the point." The idea that you go, like you had said, Chris, their humor, their cruelty of their jokes or their supposed entertainment, or even quote their arguments, is just cruel. And it doesn't take somebody of a good heart and intelligence if you just kind of appear irascible because you're trying to get something done for the good versus just being an ass. And you just look at those people, you're just cruel for the sake of cruelty, and it shows in your humor. It shows in your culture, your laws. And, I mean, you look at some laws, you're just like, there's no way around this law is just in place because it is cruel. And they get offended when you point that out.
Yeah, and then they try to then one of the worst things that right wingers do and left wing people then capitulate is right wingers attempt to define how left wingers are supposed to act and how we are supposed to accept racism or Nazism, and they try to use our philosophical viewpoints against us, which is something that's classic. Oh, you're doing race. This is reverse racism. You're oppressing me because I'm a white man who believes in white only institutions. And if I want to have a institution that bakes cakes and doesn't serve gay people, that's my right. You're oppressing me now. It's reverse racism that you're saying my point of view is wrong. So they try to do these things that then turn what is meant to be a protective and viewpoint focused on justice in on itself to say that justice is also protecting racism, which is not true at all. But the circular logic to try to trick people into engaging in defending that perspective. But this is also why you can't engage with the lower 50% in a logical battle, because they don't have the capacity to understand actual logic or construct actual logic. So attempting to deconstruct circular logic is always a losing battle, which is why
that's why you just got to frame Twitter as a Christian bakery and Trump is a gay wedding. That's it right there.
Exactly.
Well, I say that was illustrative of this is now the quote censorship battle that the right wing is like, oh, I've actually seen them already going full on. This is Nazism. This is Stalinism. And I'm like, the layers of you have to deconstruct this shit with them, right? Like, you're like, one, Twitter is a private company. And then you got to go on to the level 2 of, did the government stop you from saying you're bullshit? No. Check. Did the government fine you or imprison you for saying your stupid racist bullshit? No. Fuck off. That is not censorship. But I'm probably sure you've seen the memes that they're making about, they're just in a positively like flummoxed that they're being purged out of Twitter, or they're just being outright kicked out. Like, this is the most horrible, egregious, pearl clutching thing to them.
Yeah.
It's quiet. It's astonishing.
Hey,
But
It's amazing how sensitive they get, right?
yeah.
Well, the whole thing is that argument that Tien made, it's perfectly logical and deconstructs it, but they won't accept
won't get
that
that.
framing. It doesn't matter if you actually
Yeah.
have an argument. They don't accept it. And that's, again, the problem. You can't engage in a logical battle with the lower 50% of intelligence. It's just not something you can do. No matter how good your logic or silver bullet of information is, they will not accept it. They put on a suit of armor that will not allow any sort of information inside, and they drone on in their own head and perpetuate that nonsense, which is why we can't allow them at the adults table when we're having conversations.
Yeah,
They remind me of that race in Star Trek.
The Packlids?
Is it them who think that they're smart?
We are smart. We are strong. Yeah, that's the Packlids.
The Packlids, yeah. And in the lower decks,
Oh God, they get all those
they
weapons.
think that every Federation starship is the Enterprise.
Oh yeah. Well, I just had to. You know what? I'm going to say it. I was kind of reserved about it, but a distant family member I bounced off of Facebook because of the belief that Antifa had infiltrated the MAGA terrorists in the White House, and I was like, I think my inner monologue was Chris Bates. Don't engage with them. You'll only make them you'll only infuriate yourself. And so my thing was just like, I just decided I'm not arguing with them. I usually have to resist the urge to do it, but I'm like, I'm just bouncing you out of this, off of my page and out of my life, and blocking you and ghosting you. I'm done.
Wait, don't you have like relatives that may have fought in World War II or even World War One? Like,
I have my family's got a kind of long history of enlisted.
yeah.
In most branches. As a matter of fact,
So,
I had a
don't
great
they-
uncle named Elmer, who really cool guy.
Wouldn't most of them have had to before?
Yeah.
This is
My
like,
uncle Elmer was actually captured by the Nazis
So
and was a POW for a while.
so he was Antifa.
Yeah, he was Antifa. It's
Antifa is our.
you get to these people and it's just like these people that stormed the White House were infiltrated by Antifa.
Good. It's like the best thing that could have happened to them. They were joined by a group of organized, semi-autonomous group of people who can get things done. And maybe they'll learn something. No, we know that's not the case.
I think we should just bar that word from their vernacular. Can we do that? Can we just say that you're no longer allowed to use that word?
No, man.
but this to them trying to define things for other people. You'll hear more about Antifa's perspective from a right winger than you'll hear from ever a person who claims to be Antifa, which is not a person who is anti-fascist. Like, anybody who's anti-fascist will be like, yeah, I'm anti-fascist, but you can't be part of Antifa because it's not a fucking group. And anybody who's actually left-wing will say that, versus all the people who try to tell you what Antifa says and what Antifa thinks and what Antifa's doing and what happened at their last meeting. And I saw it on a Facebook group. Somebody showed me the comments.
Yeah, you can't. Their myth that they're creating, the myth of this is the reaction that's happened in the past 10 years. And you produce pictures and literature, or facsimiles of literature from Italy, of like, this is where it was in response to Mussolini's rise, and Antifa parties had briefly started in Germany until Hitler put them down too. But I was like, this is old, guys. Hello. It's not a modern American invention.
Americans didn't even invent fascism. Not like the actual term. It was invented by Italians.
Yeah.
I mean, Mussolini described it as this marriage of the corporate and a corporate state and governance. Like that would be a true fascistic state. And in a lot of ways, our corporations have infiltrated government. We're already in a lot of ways kind of a technocratic union of kleptocrats and oligarchs.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's gone beyond a marriage in that when you have Twitter being able to cut off the president of the United States, they are obviously more powerful in information distribution. It's not an equal partnership.
Yeah,
So
when Twitter can get information from the ground out of Iran, when Iran is experiencing an information blackout, Twitter is a vastly more powerful communication network than people give it credit for.
well, and they have more information access than the United States government
Yeah.
at that point. So, and this is why sleuth Twitter found the identities of the insurrectionists before the FBI did.
Yeah, it's like they were already not only just their identities, man. Like some people were like, "Oh, they had lunch at McAllister's 2 days ago." Like holy shit.
This is where there is a hive mind, but you just have to understand how the hive mind works. And there's Black Twitter, there's sleuth Twitter, there's Jewish Twitter, there's native Twitter, there's all these different kinds of Twitter.
In India, they call it bak bak. Like
What is it?
in India, it's called bak bak. It's like it's the sound a chicken makes.
Yeah, there's definitely some really cool factions of Twitter out there that you don't mess with the K-pop people. You just don't.
K-pop stands.
Just don't do it. You'll lose.
So the K-pop army is strong. The K-pop army is stronger than the entire right-wing army in the United States.
Oh, on the internet?
Twitter, that's
Yeah.
the most hilarious shit. They've used Twitter to subvert so much right-wing shit. It's amazing. It's fucking amazing. They've even there was a
Imagine
a
how much they could
Florida.
make NSA churn.
Oh yeah. Oh my god.
They could just make
Even that there was a rally in Florida that was a right-wing rally that was coordinated through Eventbrite, and the K-pop army went through and reserved all the tickets before anybody could get them, so then nobody could get the tickets. They fucking did that shit in less than an hour, I think, and it was such a coordinated effort that it was one of these things where the right wingers try to use the internet, and the K-pop army is deconstructing all their strategies from around the world, never having to even interface with these people, and that's why they're strong.
And that's what, yeah, it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, good luck at figuring out what K-pop stan user 33 heart @22113 actually looks like, because I guarantee that nobody knows what they look like.
Well, because they always use images of their favorite group member, so they'll post 10 pictures of a group member before they post anything of themselves, because their accounts are dedicated to those groups or an individual or whatever. So you'll never see that person on Twitter because they're such. It's not even meant to obscure their identities. They're so dedicated to these people that they are more likely to post a picture of that person than themselves, because they don't. It's not about them. It's about this person.
Yeah,
Well,
but it had a great unintended positive effect.
So there's actually a really unique symbiosis or symbiotic relationship between the K-pop fans and their favorite bands. And so what ends up happening is some K-pop star will sign a cosmetics deal, or they'll sign some kind of clothing deal, and then their army, their stan army, will go on to Twitter and go on to all the social media and be like, hey, check out this sale that's happening at these locations. And so that company that makes the actual product, they make money. The stores that are pushing the product, they make the money. The K-pop stan administration, they get uh, you know fan equity because they get everyone credit and closer to the goal of let's raise up whoever so and so to the top. And so there's this really complex consumerism model that's working in Korea that we don't get to see. Uh, but at the same time, this is a complexity of global economics. There are a lot of systems at play that we never get to see that are always influencing uh, the price of sesame seeds, or the price of tea in China, or the price of tea in America, Chinese tea in America, because that fluctuates. And we take for granted the complexity of economics because we can just go online and order shit whenever we want, and it'll show up in 2 to 5 business days. But there's more to it than that. Uh, I think if people realized how many hands were on the one product that they ordered from China, like by the time it actually got to them, well, there's no there are real ways to track this, but they're not being utilized. So maybe it's better that way. Maybe we don't need to know. We don't need the signature for every person that's been on our packages. Food and supply chain, however, I definitely want to know who's been handling it every step of the way, because if some fucked up shit happens, we want to know who's responsible. And that's like a different set of concerns.
Yeah, the transparency or lack thereof in the supply chain is a major problem for many reasons. And then, especially when you had obstructionists fucking with the U.S. postal system
Oh, God, yeah.
for the sake of trying to throw off the election. And then it used to, sometimes you can mail something. If you mailed it at the right time of day, it might get to its destination that same day. Um, that shit would happen ever so often because they were so efficient. Um, but when they got machines taken out, their sorting machines and all this shit for specifically the reason of obstructing the election, it set the company or set the postal service back about 10 years in a way where now I ordered something last month and it just now arrived, or there's been a couple things that took about a month to move through the postal system. And that's where there's one thing that came from China. I get that if it takes a month, but when I'm ordering from within this country and it's taking a month to ship out or to move through the system, it's a whole different issue where, I think the fact that I think, what is it, 66% of Americans never leave the country,
Hmm.
at
Is
least.
it that high? Wow.
So,
Maybe than
so
that.
back in September, I want to have a quick little story about purchasing something. I ordered a microphone back in September, and initially I was told that it was out of stock. It was back ordered, but it would ship out in a month in October. And so October came around, and then it was still back ordered, and the expected shipping date was moved into November. And it finally showed up a couple days ago. And lo and behold, when it arrived, the contents of the package were not the same as the contents outlined in the initial order, because the microphone company had changed one of the components that they were shipping with the microphone. It had a preamp that comes with it. And they changed that after I'd already ordered it. They lowered the price of the whole product because year-end sales and all that stuff anyway. So I thought, oh, yeah, sure, I'll just give it a shot. And lo and behold, it didn't work for me. There were problems. And so I, return it because inconsistent sound is something I'm not going to put up with. And I also waited like 3 months, 4 months to find out. And I'm pretty sure that this company has suffered a supply chain problem where some component that they needed was no longer accessible in the quantities they needed, or some other company bought them, or they just were completely unavailable. And so they had to stop selling the product that I had initially ordered, and they had to sell a rebranded version of it, just the microphone with a different preamp, but it didn't work. So it's supposed to be in this really odd position of, man, this is a company that I've trusted for many years. Why is this happening now? Well, obviously, supply chain issues. But at what level is the competition interfering? Is one of this manufacturer's competitors going in and buying critical components, or are they just running out of critical components? So that's a more likely scenario. Is just the critical components have dried up. But that's kind of where we are. I think there's a lot of, supply chain it relies on management of all these other systems to get the components in, and it's not obvious, and God, most of the time it's just frustrating, just waiting.
It makes me wonder if other countries would. I mean, some of the countries that we've probably all of us have traveled to, and I think of sort of my home away from home, Scotland. Like, you don't mess with the post. Like, Americans put up the facade. Oh, we have our postal service. We'll stand up for it. And I'm not talking about us, but the sort of chest beating bravado of right wingers, like the system, law and order. But when they sit and break it, everybody just lays down. Like, people go to sleep. And then I think about like the sort of shit that erupts. And I love the French model. Man, they'll fucking throw up the barricades and every worker in the fucking country will stop. Like in unison. And I was like, why can't we have that here? Oh, we're selfish.
What did you say to me yesterday about your French friend? Why isn't the place not on fire or something like that? Why isn't the place on fire? How can you expect to get anything done?
Yeah, the French would storm they would set up the barricades and like just shut Paris down, and like everything from like truck drivers to people who operate the trains. There's this sort of cool like thing when something is really fucked up, and I'm not saying that the French have their problems and they have their qualities, obviously, but the idea that like something shows up in French culture that pretty much the whole country's like, this is so messed up, we're gonna general strike for the next 2 days, and it really shuts down. And I'm like, there's so many layers of why America, with our bullshit, we can do it on our own bootstrap mythology that's perpetuated by the right wing. I'm like, how are you not fuckers? It's like they do realize it. They just don't want to accept it. We're not all self-made. There's no fucking way. We're in this together.
I assembled myself with 4 quarts of glue and 12 wooden pegs.
It's like, be careful on the Oregon Trail that you don't fall apart.
It was just that mythology is just so important to the core belief set of the right, to make them feel empowered, to make them feel like they're somehow superior in their implementation of what they believe are traditional core family values that somehow subsequently put them in a moral high ground for determination of the outcomes of governance.
Moral high ground.
Yeah, it's a myth of. I need to talk to historians more about that sort of phenomenon, that we didn't go out all by ourselves well, not us, but they didn't go out by themselves in single wagon trains with like one person. The whole idea of wagon trains was it's basically a community went mobile.
Oh yeah, if you were just a single Conestoga wagon with a family, and like you had two oxen, a horse, a dog, and maybe you were also dragging along like a donkey or something like that, or some goats, you were fucked if it was just you.
Yeah, like you don't do this by yourself, and it's just like the sort of collective memory loss that right wing Americans suffer. That we weren't ever collective. It's like I always am pining away for the idea that you take from the past what does work and you jettison what was evil and wrong and you synthesize towards the future. Well, I'm seeing right wingers go on about a fucking golden age that never goddamn existed.
So I've got a question. This is a question for everyone. um, is it even possible to have like is it possible for a golden era to have existed when it's only represented in history? Like it's only a story when there's no evidence to support it. Can we actually call it a golden age?
It's possible, but we don't know about it. That's where.
Well, I mean, if
it's just not anything that we've actually described or know about, because it's like that, it may have existed not for the entire world, but for a region, and one part of the world was not aware of it, and then it became a myth of Atlantis when it was just a golden era for one part of the world.
So, could a golden age have occurred for a specific, for a portion of a population, but not the rest of them?
I mean, that's what happened with Islam in the West. During the Dark Ages in the West, it was a golden age of Islam.
Yeah.
Oh, anecdotal evidence, right? Like
right there.
Is there a golden era where
13th century Baghdad? You wanted to get a book, you went to the souk, the market, and you could buy Arabic or Greek because a lot of people were actually educated. You could go buy books while people in Europe were massively illiterate. Now, right. you take away that awesome part of that history. Man, you're in the 13th century desert. There's disease and their sense of hygiene was amazing. It wasn't due to their lack of hygiene, but just lack of modern medicine, which even their medicine was more advanced than Europe. But
I think the period we're talking about, the desert, is not representative of the Islamic population at all. At that point, we're talking about getting into the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, well, I was specifically referring to Baghdad, though, in the 13th century, the stories of the bazaars and the souks in Baghdad. But yeah, Muslims, amazing.
Well, I'm talking about AD because that's where I'm like, are we talking about BC or AD?
Oh, AD.
Is it possible for institutional amnesia?
Muslim in BC. It's like Zoroastrian.
Gotta go way farther back in Persia.
Is it possible for institutional amnesia to exist when people never become part of an institution? Like, what is it? What kind of amnesia are people experiencing when the only socialization they have is
it's generational amnesia.
Generational amnesia.
And it's not just amnesia; it's indoctrination.
And that too. It's happening at the same time, though. Both are happening at the same time. The indoctrination is completely different than the amnesia in that you don't have to be indoctrinated to have generational amnesia, and you don't have to have generational amnesia to be indoctrinated necessarily. These two things are not mutually exclusive or inclusive.
Daniel just hit it with a hammer. Trying to indoctrinate into cultural amnesia just this last election. I don't know about you guys, but every time there's been an election, we always watch the news. And I remember even hearing it on the TV when I was a kid, right? That, they would always call the election, right? Or whatever state. And they had done it this way ever since I could remember it. And I'm almost 50, right? And then all of a sudden, here are all these right wingers. Oh, the media doesn't call the election. We've never done it this way. They were actually saying this and repeating this lie over and over and over. And they've got what Chris calls, I love it, the lower 50% immediately. Oh, the media doesn't do this. Well, technically, no, they don't call the election, but we've been doing this for generations. People have probably before me heard how it worked on the radio, right? Like indoctrination into cultural amnesia in real time with this last election. All these right wingers trying to say we never did it this way. Oh, we've never done it this way, and people believed them. It's scary.
I don't think anybody actually believed them. Again, this gets back to the notion these people actively pretend like these are the same people that have been acting like Santa Claus is real for the last fucking 60 years to get kids in a position where they're more mentally vulnerable adults that can be manipulated. This is manipulation in a way that it's everybody's going along with the lie and pretending they believe the lie.
Yeah.
It's just an act. They know that shit is not real, but they pretend that, oh, this is the way that we never did it. We never did it this way, and pretend that they forgot just to perpetuate. It makes it more difficult to get to the crux of what you're talking about when you have to try to convince someone that this is actually the way things happened, knowing damn well that it's the way things happen, but they're pretending that they forgot. It creates, again, it's an entire level of distraction that's meant to keep people arguing against a brick wall because they will never capitulate to logic, and that they're just trying to keep you arguing because they know your heart rate goes up, they know you get stressed out, and eventually you're going to get cancer from arguing with what they take pleasure in. They are emotional vampires that enjoy watching other people get riled up. So what's getting you pissed off and getting your heart rate up is getting them emotionally full. They're getting a dopamine drop.
Yeah, they're getting like a soul hard on.
Exactly. And it's something they get off on, and that's exactly why people can't engage with it. You're never going to convince them of a logical point. That's not why they're engaging with you. They're engaging with you to get your heart rate up, to get you stressed out, because eventually you're going to have to go to the doctor and get some fucking blood pressure medicine because of some shit you read on Facebook. Or eventually there's going to be a cancer that shows up in your fucking chest because you've been focused on so much negative shit that they're feeding off that they planted fucking cancer in your goddamn chest by pretending to be stupid online. They're pretending to be stupid about shit to make people mad. I see kids do this shit all the time. This is what kids do. This is why they know it works, because their kids do it and your kids do. Everybody's kids do, not you, but people's kids.
No, I got you.
And this is where, again, knowing how kids pretend to be stupid to piss off adults and get them riled up just for kicks is the same shit right-wingers are doing, and then left-wingers go in with giving them the benefit of the doubt to their own detriment. This is why when you give somebody the benefit of the doubt, they can turn and use that shit against you. So you have to be judicious about giving people the benefit of the doubt and not just give blanket benefits of doubt. We can't do that shit in 2021.
We could start demanding that people demonstrate that they have some kind of aptitude, but that's kind of an exclusionary act. We're not trying to be like that.
Not to mention all the stress eating that results from engaging with people like that, and all the available fast food and the sodium and all of the dopamine drops the quick dopamine highs and sodium highs that people get from just constantly ingesting this subpar, sub-quality carcinogen containing food.
You have to redirect it somewhere, and what ends up happening is people either redirect it onto themselves or onto somebody in their proximity. So then I've straight up told my dad, I've had to tell him, like, no, I don't want to hear about your argument on Facebook, because it's one of these things that people don't realize they're doing. When somebody puts venom in your system and then you can't take it back out on them because they're immune to that venom, then you have to either drain that venom from yourself or put it on somebody else. And this is where, again, they know what they're doing. They're intentionally disrupting people's lives by making them all riled up, and then that person is going to go have a bad day and take it out on their wife or their kid or their coworker or some shit where it's like, oh, I had this conversation and I had this horrible interaction with this person, and now I'm going to take it out on you because I can't actually take it out on them.
That's like the corporate world, isn't it? For the most part. There's like a giant pecking order, and small business world where there's a small business pecking order, and that's the gig economy, where you're constantly selling yourself for $5, and that's the people that think that they're contractors, but they're really just riding the gig economy. That's like the whole
all
world.
Work, selling your body. All work is selling one's body.
Yeah.
We just only make sex workers feel bad. That's the only issue. Our society will say, oh, somehow this form of selling one's body is worse than every other one. But all work is selling one's body, especially in a system that undervalues everyone's work. So it's this lie that everyone perpetuates, tell themselves, oh, sex workers are the only ones that sell their bodies. Like, no, motherfucker, everybody has to do it.
I mean, everything is appreciated through the brain. So it's all stimulating the brain some way. Are we going to accept a world where they regulate our dopamine?
We already have. We already have. I mean, that's why we have Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. They are regulating what we can do with our own chemicals. We are already past that point.
Yeah.
It's exactly why we are in a state that does not allow us to smoke weed.
But isn't that also a factor of like mass or populations that were unable to handle their shit, and also rampant crime?
I mean, one would be made to think, but that's again.
Surely there's a world out there where like weed is smokable.
No, it's not the weed. It's the sociopaths. There's only a certain type of person that's willing to exploit anything, and it's whether it's weed, whether it's power. Man, the only type of person that's willing to exploit that is a sociopath. So it had nothing to do with alcohol, the weed, the position. It's always the sociopathy, and then the sociopaths want to blame the weed, so it takes the attention off of them is what it comes down to. Over and over. It's not the guns, it's the person who's using the gun. It's the person who has criminal intentions. And again, most people don't actually have criminal intentions, but the people who do want to conflate the gun with everybody's capacity to execute a crime. So then the actual criminal is in a better position to exploit those people who've then been put in a position where they can't access something because of the hypothetical criminal. Over and over.
Yeah, because if the police actually show up and you have a gun in your hand, they might think you're the criminal.
Exactly.
And just shoot your ass and ask questions later.
Exactly. So theoretically, the Second Amendment exists, but in reality, it only exists for a certain class of people.
Yeah.
Because
that's not inaccurate.
Cop shows up and can shoot you because you have a gun and they think you're a threat, technically you don't have Second Amendment rights. And this is the argument that people have been making as to why black people who can't open carry and get shot for it effectively don't have Second Amendment rights, making us second-class citizens, which is why equating the people who fight back against police, who start the violence, is not the same with the people who storm the Capitol in an insurrection trying to coup the country. Those are not the same, because most of the time the police started the violence. These are not the same, and anybody equating them is either disingenuous or intentionally trying to muddle the waters.
Well, and that also leads to there's reports from both journalists and other MAGA people that were there. There were a lot of off-duty cops in that seditious mob. So there's the data on that.
Blue lives don't exist. And just for a final note, anytime you hear somebody say black, white, blue, purple, I don't care the color of their skin, just realize there's no actual color of blue or purple of people's skin, and that's meant to subvert. So let's not let these people use language to subvert the deconstruction of the patriarchy and the oppressive class.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
$30 got you a pretty kick-ass